I've always believed that family vacations hold a special kind of magic, a chance to patch up old wounds and maybe even share a few laughs along the way. This time, though, I clung to that hope a little tighter, even as my stomach twisted with nerves. We were heading to the family chalet, a cozy retreat tucked away in the woods, where memories and secrets seemed to hang heavy in the air. My husband, Mark, sat beside me in the car, quiet but present, his fingers drumming a restless beat on the steering wheel. I stole glances at him, trying to find comfort in the curve of his profile. Jenna, my sister, had reluctantly agreed to come along, but I could already feel the icy distance in every word she'd spoken on the phone. By the time we reached the chalet, the sun was already slipping behind the trees, casting everything in that golden light I've always loved. I stepped out of the car, breathing in the crisp scent of pine, and told myself this trip could really mean something. Jenna was already there, sprawled on the porch with a drink in her hand, her eyes scanning the horizon like she was just waiting for an excuse to leave. Mark carried our bags inside, glancing over his shoulder at me with a tired smile that didn't quite meet his eyes. I forced one back, determined to keep the peace for everyone's sake, even if my gut told me this trip was going to be anything but peaceful. Inside, the chalet was exactly as I remembered. The wooden beams overhead, the soft blankets draped over the couch, and the faint scent of the last fire we'd shared years ago. My parents were in the kitchen, clinking glasses and sharing stories in those warm, low voices that always made me feel safe. I wanted so badly to believe that this time, maybe, old wounds could finally heal if we just gave it a chance. Mark dropped our bags in the corner and stretched, his sigh carrying something I couldn't quite name. I reached out and touched his arm, my heart brimming with fragile hope. But looking back, I realized that the real storm was already brewing, waiting just beyond the gentle ripples of the lake. The first evening felt like it was wrapped in a fragile bubble, one that might burst if anyone breathed too hard. We sat around the wooden table for dinner, the clatter of cutlery trying to fill the spaces where real conversation should have been. My parents were cheerful, determined to keep the mood light, their voices weaving stories about childhood adventures and half-forgotten dreams. I tried to match their smiles, but I kept catching Jenna's eyes across the table, cool and distant, like she was somewhere else entirely. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, a small reassurance that didn't quite reach the hollow place growing inside me. After dinner, I stepped out onto the porch for some air, the night stretching out around me like a heavy blanket. The stars were bright above the trees, their cold light a sharp contrast to the warmth I'd been hoping to find here. I could hear Jenna and Mark laughing softly inside, their voices blending together in a way that made me pause. My parents were clearing dishes, moving around each other in that comfortable dance they'd perfected over decades. I took a deep breath, telling myself not to read too much into things. But there was a flicker of doubt, a tiny crack in my optimism that wouldn't go away. I stayed outside for a while, letting the cool air sting my cheeks and ground me in the present. The chalet had always been a place of refuge, a safe haven where I thought we could rebuild what had been frayed over the years. I told myself that tomorrow would be better, that Jenna would warm up, that Mark would find his smile again, that I'd find a way to bridge the gaps between us all. When I finally went back inside, Mark was waiting with a warm blanket draped over his shoulders, his tired eyes searching mine for something I couldn't quite give. I smiled back, hoping he couldn't see how my doubts were starting to outshine my hope. The next morning started out like any other vacation morning. The smell of coffee drifting through the cabin, the sun breaking over the treetops. My parents were already at the kitchen table, their quiet chatter blending with the soft clink of mugs and the crackle of the old radio. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just listening, trying to convince myself that this was what I'd been hoping for. Mark emerged from the bedroom a little later, rubbing sleep from his eyes and offering me a half smile that made my heart ache. I asked him if he was feeling up for the trip to the lake, and he hesitated, just for a beat, before telling me he wasn't feeling well. I wanted to believe him. I wanted so badly to take his words at face value, to tell myself that he just needed rest. I gave him a soft kiss on the cheek, promising I'd bring back stories and laughter and maybe a few snapshots of the lake. My parents were already bustling with excitement, ready to relive old memories and maybe make some new ones. Jenna, of course, was nowhere to be found, Her absence at breakfast, another quiet reminder of how she always kept herself apart. As we pulled on our jackets and gathered our things, I glanced back at Mark, lying on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, and tried to shake off the sense of something not quite right. I kissed him goodbye, a small, gentle gesture meant to keep everything safe. I didn't let myself think too hard about the way his eyes lingered on mine, or the flicker of something almost guilty in his expression. I just told myself he'd be here when I got back, that this trip was about healing, about finding our way back to each other. But even then, as I closed the door and stepped out into the bright morning light, a shiver ran down my spine. I had no idea what I was really walking away from, or what I'd be walking back to. The path to the lake was lined with tall pines, their needles crunching underfoot like a soft drumbeat. My parents walked ahead of me, their laughter carried on the crisp morning air, and for a moment, I let myself relax into the rhythm of their voices. The sun had already warmed the ground, and the scent of moss and wildflowers felt like a promise of something gentle. I kept my camera slung around my neck, ready to capture the little moments that would prove we'd all been here, that we'd shared something real, even if only for a weekend. My heart felt lighter than it had in days. Halfway to the lake, I realized with a sudden jolt that I'd left the camera back at the chalet. It was silly, I know, but it felt important. Like if I didn't have those photos, the whole trip would slip away from me. Just another memory too fragile to hold. I stopped and told my parents to go on ahead, promising I'd be quick. My mom reached out, brushing her fingers over my arm with a gentle smile that said she understood more than I'd ever told her. My dad gave me a small wave, already turning back to the path, the two of them fading into the soft green of the forest. As I turned to head back to the chalet, the air felt a little cooler, the laughter of my parents still echoing in my ears. The walk was quiet, each step on the path feeling like a small act of reassurance, a chance to gather my thoughts, to let the tension in my chest uncoil. I told myself it was just a camera, just a silly thing I'd forgotten. But deep down, something tugged at me, a flicker of unease I couldn't quite name. I pushed it down, focusing instead on the soft rustle of leaves and the way the light dappled through the trees. I didn't know it yet, but I wasn't really going back for a camera. I was going back for the truth. I walked a little faster than usual, my boots crunching on the gravel path as the chalet came back into view. There was a hush in the air, the kind that always makes you feel like you're about to stumble into something you're not supposed to see. My mind kept drifting to the camera, how I'd been so determined to capture these memories, to hold on to something that felt fleeting and fragile. I tried to push away the flicker of doubt that danced at the edges of my thoughts, telling myself it was just the early morning chill playing tricks on me. When I reached the front porch, I paused for a moment, my hand on the weathered railing. The wooden boards felt warm under my fingers, familiar and comforting in a way that only deepened the unease in my chest. I could hear the faint creak of floorboards inside, but I told myself it was just Mark moving around, maybe making some tea to settle his stomach. My heart gave a small, hopeful flutter at the thought of him waiting for me, wrapped in that old blanket, eyes soft with apology for missing the trip to the lake. Pushing open the door, I stepped inside, my breath catching in my throat at the sudden hush. The chalet was quiet, almost too quiet, like the calm that comes before a storm. My boots made small, hollow sounds on the wooden floor as I moved through the living room, my eyes searching for the familiar shape of the camera. But with each step, the flicker of unease grew a little brighter, a little sharper, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to find more than just a forgotten camera. I reached the bottom of the stairs and paused, my hand resting on the banister as I listened to the faint sounds above me. Voices, low and urgent, blending together in a way that made my skin prickle. My first instinct was to call out, to announce my presence and break the spell of that soft murmur. But something held me back, a tightening in my chest that told me to keep quiet, to listen for just a moment longer. My heart was thudding in my ears, a steady drumbeat that drowned out the little voice in my head telling me to leave. I took a slow step up, the old stairs creaking under my weight. The voices grew clearer, a laugh that was too warm, a hushed word that didn't belong to the comforting quiet of a sick day. My hand trembled on the railing, the wood warm and rough beneath my fingers. For a heartbeat, I thought about turning around, about going back to the path and the bright morning light. But something, a sliver of instinct maybe, pushed me forward. My foot lifted, then fell, and I kept climbing, each step pulling me closer to the truth I didn't want to see. At the top of the stairs, I hesitated again, my breath shallow as I reached out for the bedroom door. The voices were clearer now, weaving together in a soft, intimate rhythm that twisted my gut. My fingers hovered over the doorknob, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me like a stone. I took a shaky breath and pushed the door open, telling myself it was just the camera I was here for, just a forgotten thing that would let me hold on to this trip. But as the door swung wide, I realized that what I'd come back for wasn't a camera at all. It was the truth I'd never wanted to face. The door swung open with a quiet click, and for a moment, everything felt suspended in a strange, heavy silence. My eyes went straight to the bed, where Mark and Jenna lay tangled together, their bodies pressed close in a way that made my stomach twist. Jenna's hair spilled across the pillow, her bare shoulder exposed, and Mark's hand rested on her waist with an intimacy that stole the air from my lungs. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me, and I was falling, weightless and cold, with no way to catch myself. For a moment, they didn't see me. They were too lost in each other, their laughter soft and breathless like some private language I'd never been meant to understand. My heart pounded so loud I was sure they could hear it, but they didn't look up. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there frozen. My hand hovered over the doorknob, my mind trying to make sense of what my eyes refused to believe. How could they, how could he, after everything we'd shared, everything I'd given? The betrayal cut deeper than any words could. Finally, Jenna turned her head and met my gaze, her eyes sharp and cold even in that tender moment. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look surprised. Mark scrambled to pull away, his face flushing red with something that looked like shame, but Jenna just raised an eyebrow as if daring me to speak. My throat was dry, my mind reeling. The man I trusted, the sister I'd always tried to protect, they'd both chosen to tear me apart. In that single breath, I understood that nothing was ever going to be the same. I stood there, rooted to the spot, every muscle in my body locked in place as if I'd been turned to stone. My heart was hammering, my breath coming in ragged gasps that sounded too loud in the small room. Mark's eyes met mine for a second, then darted away, his lips moving in a silent plea I couldn't hear. My mind was a mess of static, memories crashing into each other. The morning we'd arrived, his tired smile, the way he'd held my hand under the table just hours ago. It all felt like a lie, a story I'd been telling myself to keep the truth at bay. Jenna shifted slightly, her arm draped over the blanket as she looked at me like she was bored, like she'd been waiting for this moment to finally come. There was no apology in her eyes, no regret, just that cool, familiar distance she'd always kept between us. My fingers curled into fists at my sides, nails biting into my palms as I fought the urge to scream, to demand answers that I already knew I'd never get. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with the scent of sweat and betrayal, and I had to swallow hard to keep from choking on it. My mind felt like it was splitting in two, part of me still clinging to the woman I'd been just that morning, the woman who believed in family, in second chances, in the possibility of something better. But the other part of me was already pulling away, already starting to close off the pieces of my heart that had been left exposed. I didn't know what would happen next, what I would say or do, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came after this, it would never include the two of them again. I took a step back, the weight of the moment pressing me down so hard it felt like I couldn't breathe. Mark's mouth opened, words tumbling out in a rush of apologies and excuses that sounded like static in my ears. I didn't hear him. All I could see was the way his hand had rested on her skin, the way she leaned into him without a second thought. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I wouldn't give them that, wouldn't let them see how deep their betrayal had cut. Jenna let out a small, almost mocking sigh and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her eyes never leaving mine. She looked like she was waiting for me to scream, to collapse, to beg for something I knew I'd never get. But I didn't. I just stared at her, at them, feeling every ounce of love I'd ever had for either of them shrivel up inside me like a dying flame. In that instant, I felt something break, a quiet, final snap deep in my chest that told me I was done. I turned away without a word, my hands trembling at my sides as I stepped out of the room. The door clicked shut behind me, the soft sound so final it felt like a seal being pressed on the life I'd known. My footsteps on the stairs sounded hollow, echoing in the empty hallway as I walked back toward the world outside. I didn't know what would come next, what I would do with the pieces of the life they'd shattered. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, one thing was clear. The man I trusted and the sister I thought I knew had destroyed everything in a single breath. The first sound that escaped my lips was a scream, raw and jagged, echoing off the walls of that small room like a wounded animal. My hands shook, my whole body trembling as I demanded answers that I already knew I wouldn't believe. Mark flinched at the sound of my voice, his eyes wide with a panic that only made me feel more alone. He tried to reach for me, his hand hovering in the space between us like a bridge that had already burned. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might tear itself apart, but I couldn't stop. The words pouring out of me faster than I could catch them. Jenna didn't even bother to cover herself, her shoulders bare and her face twisted into something that looked almost like amusement. Her lips curved into a cold smile, her eyes glinting with a cruelty I'd never let myself see before. "He only married you because I didn't want him in the first place," she said, her voice low and calm as if she were telling me the weather. The words slammed into me like a fist, knocking the air from my lungs and leaving me gasping in the silence that followed. I felt like I'd been punched, like every part of me had been laid bare and hollowed out in the same breath. Mark's mouth opened in a desperate attempt to explain, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear the way his voice broke or see the way his shoulders slumped in defeat. My mind was a blur of rage and disbelief, 1,000 memories crashing together and breaking apart all at once. My parents were just down the hall, oblivious to the storm that had erupted in their little cabin. Part of me wanted to run to them, to let them hold me and tell me it would be okay. But another part of me knew that nothing would ever be okay again. Not after this. The words hung in the air like a poison, every syllable dripping with venom that made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream again, to throw something, to shatter the fragile pieces of this room the way they had shattered me. But all I could do was stand there, my fists clenched so tight that my nails bit into my palms. My breath was ragged, every inhale a battle against the sobs that threatened to tear me apart. Jenna just watched me, her chin lifted, that same cold smile on her lips like she was proud of what she'd done. Mark took a step forward, his voice breaking as he tried to explain, but I couldn't hear him. My ears were ringing, my vision blurry with tears I refused to let fall. I thought about all the nights we'd spent planning this trip, all the quiet promises we'd whispered to each other in the dark. None of it mattered now. None of it was real. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a nightmare, the walls closing in around me as I realized just how alone I really was. The man I'd loved and the sister I'd trusted had taken everything from me. I took a shaky breath and turned to Jenna, my voice low and steady in a way that surprised me. "You can have him," I said, the words tasting like ashes on my tongue. She just raised an eyebrow, as if she'd already known that. I didn't wait for a response, didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. I turned away, my heart hammering in my chest as I walked out of the room. Each step felt like a victory, a small reclaiming of the person they'd tried to break. And in that moment, I knew I would never let them see me crumble. I didn't look back as I stepped out of that room, the door clicking shut behind me like a final resounding note in a song I never wanted to hear again. My legs felt like they might give out beneath me, but I forced myself to keep moving, my hands shaking as I braced them against the hallway wall. The air felt thick, heavy with betrayal and the stale scent of sweat that still clung to my skin. My parents' voices drifted from the kitchen, warm and oblivious, and the sound cut straight through me like a blade. I couldn't bear to bring that darkness to them. Not yet. Not when I was still drowning in it. I stumbled into the small bathroom down the hall, locking the door behind me and pressing my forehead against the cool, cracked mirror. My reflection stared back at me, hollow-eyed and trembling, a stranger wearing my skin. I let the tears come then, silent and scalding, each one a testament to the pieces of myself they'd tried to destroy. My chest heaved with the force of my sobs, but I kept my voice low, refusing to let the walls echo with my pain. In the dim light, I could almost see the woman I used to be, the woman who believed in love, in family, in the power of forgiveness. But she was gone now, buried beneath the weight of the truth I could never unhear. I splashed cold water on my face, the sting a small comfort in the storm still raging inside me. I took a shaky breath, my fingers gripping the edge of the sink like a lifeline. When I looked back up, my reflection was steadier, my eyes clearer. I knew what I had to do. I wouldn't stay in this house, in this life they'd tried to trap me in. I would leave it all behind, their lies, their betrayal, and find a way to build something stronger from the pieces they'd left behind. I stepped out of the bathroom with my shoulders squared, feeling a quiet resolve settle deep in my bones. My parents turned to look at me, their faces soft with concern that I didn't have the heart to explain just yet. My mom reached for my arm, her touch warm and grounding, but I shook my head, forcing a small, grateful smile. I knew they'd understand when the time was right. Right now, I needed to act, to take back the pieces of myself I'd let slip away. My footsteps felt heavy on the worn wooden floor, but each one carried me closer to the freedom I'd already decided was mine. I packed my bag in silence, moving through the small bedroom that had once been a refuge but now felt like a prison. My hands trembled as I folded my clothes, each movement a quiet promise to myself that I would never let them steal my hope again. I paused for a moment, my fingers brushing the old quilt on the bed, the one my grandmother had sewn decades ago. It felt like a thread connecting me to something bigger, something stronger than the lies I was leaving behind. I tucked it gently into my bag, a piece of home I could carry with me wherever I went. Mark watched me from the doorway, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the words. I didn't give him the chance. I slung the bag over my shoulder, my heart steady and sure for the first time in what felt like forever. I didn't need an explanation, didn't need another apology that would only tear at the raw edges of my heart. I walked past him without a word, my breath catching as I stepped out into the bright morning light. The sky was wide and endless above me, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could finally breathe. I could feel the weight of their eyes on my back as I walked out of the chalet for the last time, but I didn't look back. The cold morning air bit at my skin, but it felt like a balm, sharp and cleansing, each breath filling me with a new kind of courage. My parents were waiting on the porch, their faces pale with worry, but their eyes held something steadier: belief. My mom reached out, her hand a gentle pressure on my shoulder, and for a moment, I let myself lean into her touch. I didn't have to say the words. She already knew. She pulled me into a soft, silent hug, her warmth a quiet promise that I wasn't alone. My dad just nodded, his eyes steady and kind, and I felt a flicker of something like hope in the quiet strength of his gaze. There were no long speeches, no tearful goodbyes. Just the steady understanding of two people who had weathered their own storms and knew I would find my way through mine. I took one last look at them, my heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and grief, and then I turned away. Each step down that path felt like a small act of defiance, a quiet reclaiming of the power I'd let slip away. The walk down to the lake felt different this time, the trees taller, the air clearer, each breath tasting of something close to freedom. I let my fingers trail over the rough bark of an old pine, the scent of sap and earth grounding me in the here and now. I didn't know what would come next, what shape my life would take without them in it. But I knew this. I was done living in the shadows of their choices. I was done being the second best, the fallback. I was choosing myself, and that choice felt like the strongest thing I'd ever done. The lake was just as I remembered it, still and endless, the morning sun turning the water into a mirror that caught every shade of blue in the sky. I walked down to the edge, the cold breeze lifting my hair and filling my lungs with clean air that tasted like possibility. I let my bag slip from my shoulder, the weight of it hitting the ground with a quiet finality. My fingers brushed the smooth stones at the water's edge, grounding me in the moment, in the choice I'd made to stand here alone and unbroken. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the water lapping at the shore wash over me like a promise. I thought about all the ways they'd tried to convince me I wasn't enough, all the times I'd let their choices define my worth. But here, in this quiet place, I could feel something new stirring in my chest. A quiet strength, a soft, defiant beat that told me I didn't need anyone else's permission to start again. I could build something new from the wreckage, something that belonged to me alone. I stood there for a long while, the sun warm on my face, the water shimmering like a mirror to the life that lay ahead. They thought they broke me. They thought they could take everything and leave me hollow. But they didn't know me. Not really. I took one last deep breath, letting it fill every part of me, and then I turned and walked away from the lake, each step steady and sure. I was done with their lies, done with the weight of their betrayal. I was ready to begin again. On my own terms, in my own way.